It was my 52nd birthday, and all I wanted was to hand my daughter a piece of her own legacy. Instead, she laughed. The private dining room at Belfield Garden was dim, the sort of dim that tried too hard candles burning low sconces humming behind frosted glass. The rain, tapping against the windows, had started as a polite drizzle, but was now bordering on imposition. The beef Wellington was resting awkwardly on everyone's plates, half-carved steam curling lazily into the silence that had begun to settle like a second tablecloth. I sat at the head of the table, my knees brushing the underside, my collar too snug. A quiet warmth built in my chest, the anticipation mixing with the discomfort of wool and withheld breath. I reached beneath my chair and retrieved the box velvet and heavy in a way that felt deliberate. Tessa, halfway through a scroll, lifted her gaze as I cleared my throat. Before dessert, I said there's something I'd like to give. She raised one eyebrow, only mildly engaged. Brian, seated beside her in a crisp navy jacket, leaned back with a grin that didn't involve his eyes. I placed the box in front of her with both hands. She blinked at it, then flicked her phone screen off with a well-practiced thumb. "Happy birthday," I said. She opened the Omega box casually like it might contain chocolate or a cufflink. When the light struck the polished metal of the watch, her face made an almost imperceptible shift somewhere between surprise and amusement. "Wow. Classic Dad," she said. "So vintage." The watch lay there quiet and gleaming. The same piece my father gave me at 30, a timekeeper both in form and intention. Tessa angled the box toward her phone camera, captioned it, #time machine, and grinned. Her followers, I imagined, would be more entertained than moved. Across the table, Pastor Jules nodded politely. Brian raised his wine glass with the kind of smirk you reserve for private victories. Oddly, he wasn't looking at Tessa, or even at me, but at Jules, as if some invisible exchange had been completed. The conversation around the table stuttered forward. Violet, my sister, murmured something about the pastry being slightly overdone. Someone passed a dish of something that smelled like undercooked asparagus. No one asked about the watch. No one asked why I'd chosen that exact moment to pass it down. The silence that followed was not aggressive, only indifferently full. Tessa pushed the box aside gently, almost respectfully, but without real curiosity, and it slid a few inches on the white linen, leaving a shallow wrinkle in its wake. I felt a ripple of disorientation, like I'd arrived too early to a performance, and the lights refused to dim. Brian reached for the box as if it were his all along. "We'll keep it safe," he said, resting his hand on the lid with a finality I didn't like. There were no more toasts. No one lifted a glass, not even out of politeness. I chewed through the rest of my meal without really tasting it. A part of me kept waiting for her to ask something where I got it, what it meant, what time it stopped at when my father gave it to me. But her gaze never returned. After the crème brûlée arrived, over-torched and slumping, I asked for coffee. No cream. As I stirred, a waiter approached from behind, speaking low like he was reporting a change in medication. "Mr. Brannock, just confirming you requested the menu change, correct?" I turned to him, confused. "No, I didn't." He hesitated. "The switch to the prime rib from your original selection, it was made this morning. Said to be your instruction." My spoon paused against the rim. The coffee had gone cold fast. "No," I said again, slower this time. "That wasn't me." He nodded, retreating one hand tucked behind his apron like he wanted to vanish. The watch box was no longer on the table. I scanned the linen and saw only a faint impression where it had rested like an afterthought or a placeholder for something that no longer belonged. Outside, the rain had become impatient, and somewhere behind the candlelight and the muffled clink of dishes, I felt the first quiet dislocation between who I was and who they expected me to be. I had offered something old to keep something enduring. They saw it as quaint. I saw a clock no longer ticking for them. I left the dining room without dessert. I told them I had a headache, but truthfully the only thing aching was something I hadn't named in years. The rain was heavier when I stepped out. Not dramatic, just committed. I stood under the Belfield awning longer than I needed to, watching the valet shuffle cars and umbrellas like chess pieces on a board no one wanted to win. No one chased after me. no one called out, not even Tessa. By the time I reached home, the silence had thickened into something that waited with me inside the foyer. Fairlight Crescent always felt larger after dark, as if the walls leaned away from me, refusing to share warmth. I dropped my keys into the bowl Ruth had placed there years ago, the porcelain chipped and faithful. In the kitchen, I uncorked a bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving for a weekend that never quite arrived. It tasted like metal and memory. I carried the glass, still full, into the study and opened my laptop. The screen blinked awake with unread emails. Their subject lines pulsed with urgency. They hadn't earned quarterly audit summary, HOA reminder. Brian Wickett sent you a message. I clicked that one last. Don't overthink it, Ellis. She's just young, that was all. No greeting, no sign-off, just the casual confidence of someone who thought they understood the damage they'd dealt. I leaned back, letting the words echo in the blank space of the room. Behind me, the outline of my jacket hung perfectly on the back of the chair, still creased at the elbows. The umbrella stand by the door hadn't held anything in years, but I still reached for it on rainy nights. Ghosts of habit, like fingerprints on cold glass. An alert pinged in the corner of the screen. A shared folder, Belfield event files, final. I hesitated, then clicked. Inside were invoices, a seating chart, and the catering contract. I opened the menu summary, my eyes pausing on line 5, main course. Halibut, lemon, beurre, blanc. I frowned. I had confirmed salmon. I remembered it clearly. Salmon was safe neutral. Halibut, on the other hand, I could barely tolerate. I scrolled down. In the footer margin, there was a faint discoloration, like someone had used whiteout digitally, then retyped over it. Sloppy work, the initials next to the edit, B. I moved to the budget sheet. One line had been rounded down by exactly $2,000. Another had been shifted entirely to a miscellaneous column. This wasn't a typo. This was curation. At the bottom of the folder sat a document titled Peterson Legal, Draft Reassignment.pdf. The name made my stomach lurch. Peterson had represented my family when we first set up the Brannock Trust. He wasn't the sort of man who sent drafts lightly. I opened it. The PDF loaded slowly, each page a breath I didn't want to take. The first paragraph looked familiar boilerplate trust language. But page 3 stopped me. Pending ratification, administrative oversight of the Brannock Family Trust shall pass to Tessa Brannock and in advisory role Brian Wickett. My name was still there, buried under a clause about prior legacy advisement. The language wasn't aggressive, it was elegant. Legal euphemisms always are. But it said everything. They had started the process. They hadn't mentioned it at dinner. Of course not. The dinner wasn't for me. It was for optics, a ritual. A staged exchange so that on paper no one could say I wasn't honored. The real gift had already been given, and not by me. I clicked through the pages. On the last one, the signature block had a mismatch in formatting Tessa's name in a bold serif Brian's in smaller italics. That alone told me who had typed it. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. Then I reached for my Cabernet and found it untouched. From somewhere deep in my inbox, I dug up an old message. One I hadn't opened in over 3 years. It was from Catherine, my ex-wife. We hadn't spoken since the final hearing, but she had sent this after the settlement. If they ever try to take what you built, don't hesitate. At the time, I thought it was bitterness. Now, I wasn't so sure. The silence in the house wasn't empty. It was observant. And I was beginning to realize I had mistaken quiet for peace. I clicked off the screen. The faint wine ring on the desk felt like a misplaced signature. Something had already been stamped. The next morning, Dory Mencken called and said, "Meet me at Maple Brew. I think I owe you a folder and maybe an apology. I didn't ask questions. Not yet." Maple Brew Cafe sat on the corner of Broad and Stillwater, a squat yellow building with a crooked chimney and permanent scent of cinnamon. It had been around longer than half the storefronts on the block. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle when I stepped in, brushing past a man and waiters talking about trout yields like stock prices. The tables were sticky as always. Sunlight filtered through the foggy windows, catching the steam from mugs and conversations in mid-air. Dory was already seated in the back, a cardigan slipping off one shoulder, the elbow unraveled just enough to look intentional. She waved a half cookie at me in greeting. "Black coffee. 2 sugars," she said. "Unless you've gone soft since the divorce." I smirked, then sat. Same as ever. A moment passed. The waitress Amanda, or maybe Amy, poured my coffee and gave Dory a refill. Dory didn't speak until she had stirred hers 4 full times. Then, without ceremony, she slid a manila folder across the table. The folder was creased at the spine, and a faint coffee ring blurred the top left corner. "I found this in my home office," she said. "It wasn't supposed to come home." It just did. I opened it. The first page was dated March 8, 2022, minutes from a Brannock Trust subcommittee meeting I had supposedly attended. My name was there, typed under present. Beneath that, a signature that looked like mine if you glanced quickly. But the B was off too tight, too neat. My actual signature had always leaned left like it was trying to exit early. Was I at this? I asked already, knowing the answer. "No," Dory said. "That was the meeting they told me you'd missed but signed off remotely." I turned the page. Behind the minutes was an auction certificate sloppy printout corner-torn listing a 1960s Omega Seamaster serial ending in 7F3. It was filed under Seller B. Wickett. Dated June 3rd, 2 weeks before my birthday. My stomach pulled tight. He sold it. I asked more to myself than her. Dory sipped her coffee, eyes never leaving me. "That's what it looks like. I can't be sure of the details, but I remember Catherine once told me, 'Brian plays long games. Tessa's too proud to notice.'" I didn't get it at the time. I ran my hand over the folder. The paper was warm from her hands. A small yellow post-it clung to the inside cover, her handwriting sharp and narrow. "Trust is a paper Ellis." The printout trembled slightly in my grasp. I wasn't angry, not yet, just unmoored, like I'd walked into a house and all the furniture had shifted by 2 inches. Not enough to scream foul play, but enough to make you fall. "I should have spoken up earlier," Dory said. "But I didn't know how much was coordinated. I thought it was just Tessa being modern, distracted." "She didn't lie," I said. "No, she just didn't ask questions." I looked around. The chatter hadn't changed. A teenager at the front counter was arguing over lactose-free milk. 2 older men discussed weather patterns and how they affected lake yields. The world went on unaware of my little internal demolition. I picked up the auction slip again. There was a smudge on the bottom corner, what looked like a fingerprint blurred in ink. My father's watch hadn't been received as a keepsake. It had been bartered away in advance. Leveraged. Everything at dinner had been a front. "I want to trace this," I said softly. "Every step, every transfer, every cover-up." Dory nodded without pause. "I'm retired, not dead." A small laugh escaped me, not entirely bitter. She leaned forward. "Ellis, this is going to get messy. You ready for that?" I looked down at my coffee. The surface trembled barely, but enough. "Messy doesn't scare me anymore," I said. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift and the shape of the street grew clearer. I folded the folder shut with both hands, feeling its quiet weight. A different kind of gift, maybe. One that unwrapped slowly and only in the dark. I logged back into the county archive database for the first time since I'd retired. My old password still worked. No one had changed it. That shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow it did. The basement of the Penobscot County office still smelled like disuse and ambition. Same flickering fluorescent bulbs, same row of file cabinets that shrieked when you pulled them too fast. I hadn't set foot here since the closing audit of 2020, when I left with a handshake, a gold-rimmed clock, and a thermos with my name spelled wrong on the tag. I brought that same thermos with me today. The lid was cracked now, and it dripped a little every time I tilted it. But it still held heat, like I still held something. Vaughn met me at the door. His hair was shorter, glasses thicker, but the way he held a folder close to his chest hadn't changed. He was once my assistant. Now he ran the whole records floor. Ellis, he said with a nervous smile, wasn't expecting to see you. Don't worry, I said. I'm not here to reclaim an office, just a few facts. He led me past the rolling carts and forgotten election signage to a desk near the rear clean except for a half-dead succulent and an open box of paper clips. He logged me in with a guest admin override. I keyed in my old credentials. They still worked. I didn't comment, just nodded. The screen blinked to life. Archive folders categorized by trust name amendment and filing year. It took me 8 clicks to find what I didn't know I was looking for. Brannock Family Trust. Internal reorg drafts. There were 6 PDFs. One was blank. Another was a scanned lunch menu from an off-site conference. The rest contained familiar formatting, Peterson legal headers footers stamped with initials I didn't recognize. I opened the third one. Midway through the second page, my name appeared in a vote tally. Abstained. I had never seen this draft before. The date, May 2nd, 2022. Vaughn, I called. He appeared like he'd been listening the whole time. Did I attend this meeting, I asked. He blinked. You were retired by then. I clicked further. Tessa's name appeared under proponent and in the margin, final realignment C, motion draft. A motion I had never read, let alone drafted. I scrolled through user access logs. My login had been used twice in June, not by me. One access came from an IP tied to a private firm in Augusta. Brian's law school friend worked there. I remembered him a handshake that lingered too long, eyes that never blinked. I printed the page. Another document invoice reconciliation showed Brian coordinating catering invoices on June 5th, 2 weeks before my birthday. It was bundled with an electronic signature labeled EB Confirm. My initials. I leaned back, thermos in hand. The coffee had gone bitter. The lights hummed above, too bright now. I printed 3 more pages, stapled them slowly by hand. The staple clicked with finality. Across the top sheet, I took out my pen and wrote, Motion for 3 p.m. vote. Brannock Trust Dispute. I underlined dispute twice. Behind me, the file cabinet groaned. Or maybe it was the building itself shifting slightly in the weight of what was now uncovered. I sent Vaughn a nod. Can you do me a favor, I asked. Archive these under the same tag, but mark them as under review. Quietly, he nodded, his face somewhere between concern and loyalty. I logged out of the system, but not before checking the fingerprint logs. 2 accesses. One with an incomplete location match. One with a mismatched keystroke pattern. Both had my name. I left the office and sat in my car for a while watching a parking lot that hadn't changed in a decade. The world outside moved at a steady, unconcerned pace. I opened my laptop, still hot from earlier, typed a single sentence into an email addressed to the board. I'll be attending. Bring the original charter. I hit send. The message traveled into a digital sky already crowded with unread truth. I entered the chamber exactly at 2:59 p.m. My father used to say, "You don't have to speak loudly if your papers are loud enough." The room looked the same as when I had sat on the committee's opposite side years ago, panel wood darkened from decades of sun, digital timer blinking red above the hearing table, and that unmistakable smell of old carpet fighting the bitter ghost of burnt coffee. It was the scent of bureaucracy deeply brewed. Brian was already seated, legs crossed like he owned the floor. His suit was too crisp, creased like it had just left the tailor's hands, and on his wrist the omega ticked quietly. To everyone else, it was a nice vintage timepiece. To me, it roared. Chairman Ames cleared his throat and tapped his mic. Item B. Review and vote on internal restructuring claims for the Brannock Family Trust. I stood slowly. There was no need for speeches, just precision. From my case, I pulled the folder creased but intact, and a USB flash drive labeled in Dory's handwriting, Final. I submit evidence. I said. Chronologically ordered, forged trust meeting minutes, auction certificate for the Omega Seamaster catering invoices and system access logs showing IP mismatch, and forged electronic signatures. Chairman Ames glanced at the clerk. The clerk nodded, already inserting the USB. I continued. If you go to document 3, page 4, you'll find metadata showing the document was edited from an external location, not the Brannick estate or any known proxy access point. The signature used appears identical to mine, but with inconsistent stroke pressure. It was simulated. Brian leaned forward, arms still folded. He didn't blink. You can't bring a family dispute into a civic session, he said calmly. This was internal restructuring, mutual benefit. Ellis was retired. The board ratified those changes legally. He turned slightly to the board members, projecting composure like it was cologne. That's when I gestured to the screen. Please cue CCTV footage from June 16th. Belfield Garden private room. Provided by the venue with consent. The clip began. Me handing the box across the table. Tessa scrolling. Brian sipping wine. Then the slide, the Omega watch moving almost casually to the table's edge. Pause, I said. Now look at the timestamp, June 16th, 7:38 p.m. 2 days after the watch was listed for auction by Seller B. Wickett. A hushed rustle spread across the table. Even Jules shifted in his chair. Chairman Ames narrowed his eyes. So the item was already sold, or leveraged, I said. Either way, it was never a gift. I turned to the pastor. Jules, you were there. Would you say the signature on the restructuring draft matches mine? Jules hesitated, then gave a slow, resolute nod. No, I've watched Ellis sign things for years. That wasn't him. Brian stood then, finally. This is emotional framing. You all know Ellis. He's what I cut in. Old, retired, dispensable. He said nothing, only glanced at the watch on his wrist. That alone said enough. Chairman Ames raised his hand. We'll call the vote now. There was no debate. 5 hands went up, 2 didn't. Motion carries, Ames declared. Oversight of the Brannick Trust reverts to Mr. Ellis Brannick effective immediately. It wasn't applause that followed, it was quiet. Heavy, recognizing quiet. The kind that acknowledged something broken had at least momentarily been rebalanced. Brian gathered his things slow and neat. At the door, he turned. You win paper, he muttered. She's still with me. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Let the paper speak. Outside, the air was cool, the late afternoon light filtering through courthouse trees like patient judgment. I paused on the steps. My phone buzzed. A text. Tessa. I didn't know about the auction, but maybe I didn't want to. I stared at the screen. A message, both apology and accusation, weighted with the cowardice of hindsight. I pocketed the phone. Above me, the clock tower rang once, then twice. Time was still moving. So was I. The Omega watch was back. Not in a box, just resting in a brown paper pouch folded over twice and taped with care as if whoever left it feared it might breathe. There was a letter, 2 handwritten thick stock paper sealed in rose wax. The kind Tessa used for holiday cards when she was 15 and still believed in glitter pens. I found it propped against the porch chair sometime around noon, after the mail had already come. No courier, no footsteps, just there. I brought it out to the garden behind the house. The sun was gentler than usual. Low August light filtered through the maple trees whose leaves hadn't yet decided if they were ready to turn. The swing still hung there 2 thick ropes and a plank I had sanded smooth when Tessa was 8. It had survived storm squirrels and one terrifying pumpkin toss in the fall of 2010. The rope now was fraying slightly where it looped around the branch. Like most things, it held on out of habit more than strength. I sat on the edge of the raised garden bed and unsealed the wax with my thumb. It cracked with a soft resistance, leaving a faint pink crescent on my nail. If I'd had the courage to say, "This face-to-face the letter began, you wouldn't be reading," I held my breath longer than necessary. I let Brian handle things because it was easier than confronting you. You always made me feel small when it came to money, to the house, to the trust. I thought if I stayed out of it, nothing bad would happen, but silence lets rot grow. I see that now. There was more. Lines of regret stacked like overdue bills. He sold the watch without telling me. I only found out after the hearing. I bought it back. I turned the pouch over into my palm. The Omega landed with a small metallic sigh. No box, no velvet, just cold steel warmed by August air. The band had a small nick now near the clasp, as if it had been caught on something once, just enough to mark it, not ruin it. From the back porch came the screen door's familiar creak. Knock, knock. Violet called already halfway into the yard with a foil-wrapped pie in her hands. You weren't answering your phone, and I had a hunch you'd be brooding near vegetables. I smirked. You bring rhubarb and judgment apple, actually. I'm evolving. She set the pie down and sank into the chair opposite mine, brushing some stray leaves from the armrest. We sat for a while without speaking. The swing creaked gently behind us in the wind. She wrote, I said eventually. I figured Violet replied. You've got that weird peace discomfort thing going on. I handed her the letter. She didn't open it, just held it for a moment, then handed it back. She's still finding you, she said. You're still her compass Ellis, even if she's spinning. I nodded, but didn't agree aloud. The watch was back. That was something. Not resolution, but gesture, and sometimes that was all people could manage. I've been thinking, I said. Maybe I could start something small, for people like us. Violet raised a brow. Like divorced parents who still use full names when they talk to the dog, I chuckled. Like parents who never figured out how to parent the silence after the shouting stopped. She smiled, the soft kind. Well, isn't that a ministry waiting to happen? That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with an application form for St. Avon's Church's community education slot. In the space marked Proposed Workshop title, I wrote Money and Meaning, after divorce. Under Why do you feel qualified to teach this, I just wrote, because I'm still learning. That night, after the house had gone quiet again and the garden lights dimmed, I took the Omega watch from the counter and slipped it onto my wrist. The click of the clasp was soft, final, and oddly fitting. For the first time in years, it felt like it belonged there. I started the workshop with 8 people, 3 not even parents, and 1 just there for the free coffee. I didn't care. They came in quietly, shuffling across the linoleum floor of the St. Avon's Church basement, unsure where to sit. The folding chairs squeaked with every adjustment. The projector was a loaner from the library, humming louder than the fluorescent lights. Behind me, a banner drooped from thumbtacks declaring in Comic Sans rebuilding 1 number at a time. I stood at the front of the room in a blue sweater. Violet had given me no tie, no briefcase. Just a marker, a dry erase board, and the conviction that there was still meaning in helping others read between the lines of their own lives. Let's start here, I said. This I pointed to the screen behind me as a 401k statement. Looks like gibberish, but it's a map if you know how to read it. A man with tired eyes raised his hand. Is this going to be one of those self-help finance talks? I smiled. Only if you're hoping to help yourself. I just show numbers. You decide what they mean. We went through basics, compound interest, pre-tax versus Roth, how to spot hidden fees. The group started loosening up around the second joke about my own catastrophic target investment in 2009. During a short break, people mingled by the coffee table. The room smelled faintly of burnt filter and hand sanitizer. I noticed her then, middle-aged woman in a red scarf, raising her hand even though we weren't technically in session. What if she asked, what if my kid just doesn't care what I say anymore? Her voice didn't shake, but something beneath it did. I nodded. Then say less, I answered, but mean it more. She didn't write anything down. She just looked at me for a long time. Then she smiled, slightly, and resumed. On the screen, I brought up the third slide. Lesson 3, The Cost of Silence. This, I said, circling the phrase, isn't about missed paychecks. It's about what we lose when we don't speak, especially when it's hardest. I told them about Tessa without naming her. about what wasn't said, what was misunderstood, and how sometimes the loudest moments in life happen in the quiet aftermath. They nodded, or didn't. I didn't need their reactions to know it landed. Midway through the session, while I was explaining a sample withdrawal chart, someone knocked lightly at the door. A delivery man stepped in with a bouquet not extravagant, just sunflowers and white daisies wrapped in simple brown paper. Tucked inside was a small card sealed with a clear sticker. He looked around. Ellis Brannick. "That's me." He handed it over and disappeared without waiting for a tip. I opened the card. "You taught me pause. Love tea, no date, no explanation, just 12 words that rewrote something in me." I didn't read it twice. I didn't need to. Instead, I folded it slowly and slid it into my wallet behind my driver's license. That spot had been empty since Ruth's emergency contact number was erased 5 years ago. When I turned back, I saw Pastor Jules sitting at the back row. He hadn't made a sound, just sat with his hands folded, listening, nodding once when I caught his eye. After the session, as people gathered their belongings, a few lingered. They didn't want more advice. They just didn't want to leave right away. I picked up the marker and erased the board, the squeak dry and honest. In fresh blue ink, I wrote, Session 2, What You're Worth Isn't What You Earn. Then I added a small line beneath almost an afterthought, Bring Your Story. Outside, the early March air still held winter's teeth, but the garden behind the church had started to stir. Snowmelt had carved veins in the soil. A green shoot pushed defiantly near the brick path. Spring, like healing, always started smaller than expected, and numbers, like people, were best understood when you didn't just read them, but listened.